Kutu katoa, ko John Reid tokoingoa. Welcome to this edition of Water New Zealand's podcast series, Te Wara o Te Wai. I'm John Reid from the Water New Zealand Climate Change Group. In the past few months, our podcast series has been unpacking some of the key issues that we, the water sector in Aotearoa, New Zealand, need to tackle if we're to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We've based this on our recent guide, Navigating to Net Zero, Aotearoa's water sector low carbon journey, and used this as a springboard for these discussions. We've talked about the journey and context of a carbon emissions targets, the importance of developing a baseline, and we've also talked about forecasting. So what we're talking about today is what we heard at the Water New Zealand conference and Expo, where last month about 1,200 people from the water sector gathered in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington, to discuss the key issues facing our sector. And one of these was climate change. Climate change was pretty big at the conference. It was great to see. So we're going to reflect now on some of these discussions at the conference, and in particular, what's new and emerging in this area. To do this, I'm joined by climate change group member and wastewater treatment engineer, Andrew Springer. We're also joined by three young water professionals, Alice Hoskins, who works in the civil water team at Oricon, Alida Van Vugt, a process engineer at PDP, and Kate Fouché from the GHD water team. Kia ora, Andrew, Alice, Alida, and Kate.
Kia ora.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. So this year I was really excited at conference because there were so many papers and discussions about climate change, mitigation and adaptation. To me, this really shows we've moved on in climate change and carbon, and now certainly at least becoming mainstream and part of everyday conversations on our projects. So Andrew, just over to you. What did you think? What were some of the hot topics from conference around climate change that you saw?
Thanks, John. I was overwhelmed by how many climate change papers there were this year. From a few years ago, there was one or two, and now it's one of the main subjects for conversation. It's brilliant. There were just so many papers. I actually struggled to get to all the ones I wanted to. There was really exciting questions about what we do with our biogas and what we can do with our emissions, how we actually do the accounting, how we select our different plants, how we could do things to improve efficiency. A really wide range of papers. Alida, can you relate to us a key learning that you got from the conference and got you excited?
Yeah, I mean, to build on what you said, I really feel like there was a strong theme of taking leadership and ownership of climate change matters in our day-to-day work and integrating that as business as usual, which really excited me. And one of the quotes from a keynote speaker said, "Progress over perfection." And I think that really applies with everybody learning how to do this type of work, sharing their experiences and improving together. And so I'm excited to see things just becoming normalized, carbon assessments and all of our design, and that really strong theme of people taking leadership and doing what they can in their little spaces.
Do you think if people take leadership, this will make a big difference to our industry?
Yes, definitely, because we all have a small part we can play, and I think sometimes you get a little bit like, oh, I can only influence these small things. But if everybody influences the small things they can, we're going to get way better outcomes together.
Alice, same question for you. What excited you at the conference in the climate space?
I think it was definitely around having embodied carbon and operating emissions at the forefront of design, as well as Te Mana o Te Wai. We also heard a presentation by Marka Baker-Jones regarding the climate change mandatory obligations for reporting. So that's having climate-related disclosures within the financial sector for annual reporting, which was really interesting to hear. And that some of the larger companies, including bankers and insurers, are now having to report on their climate change related risks that they see for their shareholders. So I personally am quite passionate in that area in terms of future risks of insurers pulling out of high risk areas for homes and also commercial areas, which we are already kind of starting to see. So I think there's a lot of learning to be had and the growth around this space as well. So navigating risk for future investments too.
Great stuff. I have to admit, I missed that paper. I wish I had actually attended it.
It's really interesting. Yeah, really interesting.
Kate, same question for you.
Yeah, I attended quite a few of the digital space presentations, and so one of the sessions I went to was on non-revenue water savings through smart meters with an addition of a vibration sensor. And that was really interesting, especially as smart meters are quite a new space in New Zealand, and they're currently actually being rolled out in some big cities like Auckland and Christchurch. And I actually presented a poster alongside my colleague at the conference about New Zealand's overall current state of affairs and state of readiness for smart meter rollouts. So yeah, it was quite an interesting session I went to, and obviously leans a lot into overall reduction of water use and, as a bigger picture, a reduction in stuff like process emissions and overall carbon footprint.
So if we all went to smart meters in the next few years, what sort of improvements do you think we'll see as an industry and for the climate?
There's definitely a lot of things to think about in the smart metering rollout, and it's going to take quite a few years to put that all in place. But there's lots of benefits, such as like water savings and leak detections, and it will make a big change in water not being wasted, so to speak. And then in the long term, because of the overall water savings that we're achieving, it will defer the need to develop a new source, potentially reducing the carbon footprint. And it sort of leans onto the idea of, do we need new infrastructure, or can we just change and adapt our behaviour?
Yeah, I agree with Kate. I think the increase in water meters will also help increase households and consumers' awareness of consumption, and people will become more mindful with their uses. This will increase the productivity of water and also increase our water literacy as a country around our awareness of using it.
Do we think that to meet some of our climate change challenges, we will need to have new skills in the workplace?
Yes, I definitely do think so. I think skills such as awareness, but also what we definitely saw coming through was the metrics relating to embodied carbon within our designs and our pipe laying or other sort of high level designs that we have, and the skill set around understanding where and what to install or what to design in certain locations. I think that will probably need to increase. Our knowledge in the space as a wide needs to increase, and our awareness. I think that's something that's really important, is also knowledge sharing between companies. When someone has a great innovative idea, is to not necessarily hold it to themselves, but to share it widely so then everyone can benefit from it.
I also think the digital space is like very much growing in terms of new skills that we may require in the workplace, and lots of different programs coming out and tools that we can use to that would benefit us.
Some of those sort of link quite nicely to what I wanted to talk about next, which was the climate change group held a workshop on embodied carbon emissions. And that really struck home to me. Looking at that was how in PAS 2080, the new guidelines show, they've got the carbon reduction curve about when in a project you can make the most impact. And the earlier you are in that project, the better, essentially, because, as we were just talking about, can you actually defer building something or stop building it altogether, through to once you're actually in the project, it's really difficult to make much of a difference just with trying to play with different types of materials or something like that. So that was a key. It was really interesting for me. Just wondered, in terms of the embodied carbon emissions space, any key learnings from conference? Lida, you were also at that workshop, any thoughts from that?
Yes, I was really lucky to help out as a table facilitator, and it was really cool watching my table build on those ideas that Alice and Kate were just covering around the PAS 2080 kind of avoid, switch, improve approach. And the first thing they identified in this case study was it was for building a new reservoir for a town supply. And the first thing they identified was, do we need the reservoir, or could this be could this have been avoided through better water demand management, because they realised the use per capita was actually quite high. So definitely building on those themes of incorporating PAS 2080 and doing better strategic design. Stepping back, as engineers, we get really excited to go in and design and build something, but do we actually need to build it to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. I know, Alice, I think you got involved, or you went along something about environmental product disclosures, or EPDs. Do you want to tell us a little about what you learnt about those?
Yeah, so the first presentation I attended was a panel on EPDs, which I didn't actually know what that was. It was the first I'd heard of it, and it was environmental product disclosure declarations, which pretty much means that there's a verified information set and a bunch of metrics behind the design or the product that's being sold, such as a concrete pipe, which I'd never heard of it before, but it's pretty much the metrics behind it are based on the impact of this product on climate related risks or impacts. So the most common information that's normally used in the industry currently is related to emissions and embodied carbon. In the buildings and structures industry, there's a lot of focus on the green star ratings of buildings, which I think we could try and incorporate this nicely with the impact of how EPDs could be used in our construction industry around pipe laying. We also heard on a presentation regarding strip lining or trenchless or trenching approach and the different embodied carbon regarding each construction methodology and the difference that you can reduce depending on what kind of method you are using. So I think it's really important that having embedded carbon and operating emissions at the forefront of our minds during design will also help increase our awareness and grow our knowledge in that space. So when we are selecting a particular pipe to be laid, if we know what kind of embodied carbons are in it due to using EPDs, we can help bring awareness and at least try and limit it as much as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. Kate, did you get along to that presentation as well, or have you done any work with EPDs?
Yeah, I also attended that panel session as well. And yeah, like Alice said, that was the first time I'd heard of EPDs before. And it was really interesting to hear from the three different speakers, especially someone from the Hines concrete manufacturers, and then also someone from Watercare about the client's perspective of EPDs and how important they are in the projects.
Do you mind if I just jump in and say I also went on the EPD walking tour, and it was so fantastic to see how many suppliers have put all the hard work and money into putting these EPDs together, and how just frank they are and honest about where their biggest emissions lie and how they're looking into improving it. I just thought it was fantastic.
That links pretty closely to my next sort of follow-up question to that, which was going to be around our culture and behaviours to achieve the reductions in embodied carbon. Any thoughts on what we might need to be doing to try and achieve those objectives of lower embodied carbon?
I think it's councils often have targets that they need to try and meet for net zero. However, trying to motivate the private sector can often be quite of a challenge when it's often quite profit driven or prioritizing other related elements for design. So trying to increase the emissions and climate related impacts to try and make it more cost saving and profitable for them as well. We also have increasing innovation. The construction industry could definitely do with some more innovation around its construction methods and materials that we use, such as Alida was talking about, all the different suppliers that are really trying to focus on this too.
Yeah, I agree with the more innovation. I think a lot of projects and methods that we use are tried and tested, which is good, but usually minimal modifications, and it sort of inhibits the requirement for us to innovate and individualize projects. And especially in the current climate that we're facing in terms of carbon requirements and considerations with most clients, it's really important to consider.
I think it's actually really quite reassuring to hear so many suppliers are on board with the carbon journey, because this is a journey for all of us. And I think that's really great news that they're taking it on board, and they're proactively managing their footprint as we designers look at things and look at how we can reduce the footprint of everything that we do. Our clients are looking at how they can reduce their operational and their embodied. And of course, there's the benefit for everyone. If we can reduce the embodied carbon, we're generally reducing the cost of production and the cost of the project. So everybody's in a winning position if we're all on this journey. It's great stuff.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add that, like in the panel discussion, they were saying how a lot of these companies are now doing their EPDs and being aware of that now, because a lot of clients are looking for that, and so companies that don't have that are kind of locked out and sort of not as desirable for the client and the overall project.
One of my big interests is around process and operational emissions, and how these can be reduced. After all, they can be more than half of a utility's annual emissions from carbon. That's methane and nitrous oxide. One of the memorable papers for me was Kevin Bryan of Watercare sharing the learnings from monitoring and trialing the equipment on the pilot plant at Mangaree. It's really interesting, but that there's new technologies out there we've got to understand and how it impacts on our processes. But what's also humbling is we've still got a lot to learn. And from listening to Kevin and knowing what's happening in the international space, New Zealand's up there with the rest. We're at the forefront because of this sort of work that's being shared openly at the conference. A question for a leader then. What did you learn about process or other forms of operational emissions?
Yeah, I was really excited to see my colleague Derek actually presenting on how they reduced the estimated operational emissions of the Cambridge wastewater treatment plant by 90%, and a lot of that was just moving away from your traditional high emission kind of treatment methods, ponds and whatnot, into kind of lower treatment methods that also get better treatment quality and high environmental outcomes as well. So that was really awesome to see him presenting that. He's also a young water professional doing great things. Another really interesting presentation I went to was around reuse of biogas and reducing your scope 3 emissions. But then a real curveball was that the water entity wouldn't get the reductions in our greenhouse gas reporting scheme, and that all those benefits would go to a power entity or wherever it went to in the grid. So it was kind of like a catch-22 of, would they invest in doing this when another entity gets the benefits? Do we need to collaborate better to reduce operational emissions across the board? And how can we get over these obstacles to achieve emissions reductions together, rather than this is yours, this is mine type situation, and who's going to fund it?
I think that in the wastewater treatment plant space as well, there's particularly a lot that we can do to use and capture some of that emissions as well. So operational emissions can also be a great opportunity for our clients to decrease. A company recently upgraded one of their processes to use a biomass boiler to reduce their annual emissions by 48,000 tonnes of CO2 annually. That's the equivalent of 22,000 cars annually. And I feel like such examples show of how large of an improvement that our processes and our different types of designs can have, even just annually, not just a one-off.
I'd be really interested in hearing about really the future of the New Zealand water industry from our three young water professionals who've got here today. So in terms of climate change specifically, what do you think are some of the key challenges that we need to overcome, and how would you go about starting to solve some of these problems? Kate, do you want to kick off with that one?
Well, I'm based in Wellington, and the main challenges I see in our space is dealing with aging infrastructure and population growth, which I'm sure a lot of the other areas in New Zealand also deal with. but this is like dealing with it in terms of limited budget and consideration for carbon, and it's a hard one to solve. It's sort of really down to how much funding is available, and you sort of need like a staggered approach to ensure that the funding but also the embodied carbon inputs are used where required.
Great. Alida, anything from you?
Yeah, just with the future of our water networks across New Zealand, we've got a lot of overdue renewals, and that's going to be a lot of embodied carbon doing those renewals. We're slightly lacking in tools and guidance specific to the water sector, water infrastructure sector, to undertake assessments and assist in carbon consideration, although that's improving all of the time. And I'm just really interested to see where technology takes us. I'm sure this is the dinosaur level of information stage. We'll look back in 10 years and laugh at ourselves for how little we know and what we were doing, but we've got to start somewhere. So I'm just really interested to see how much biogenic carbon can we minimise or even eliminate, probably not, but in the future in our wastewater treatment, and how much embodied carbon can we reduce with all of the innovation happening. So I think that hopefully more carbon consideration will only contribute to mana OTY, and I'm sure Alice will build on that a bit further.
Yeah, I think personally I'm really passionate or interested in seeing how we can communicate and pass our knowledge on in an increasing water literacy state across the whole of the public of New Zealand. I know that there's sometimes been a bit of a confusion, particularly in the recent election, about what we're doing in the water space and why, what's occurring. Also building on what Kate and Alida have mentioned regarding funding and our aging infrastructure, it's really important to try and get a bit of a investment into this sector. And one way that could help solve this is charging or paying for water in an appropriate manner. We heard from our keynote speaker from Western Australia was in terms of taking their community on a conversation and on a journey of like how depleted and degraded our infrastructure is, and with investment we can try and increase a lot of that availability of funds. Also, on a project related sense, having embodied carbon and operating emissions along with Te Mana OTY at the governing level of priorities for design in the future will ensure a better awareness of design and outcomes for generations.
Thanks all. That's been a really useful discussion. Just like to wrap up with some top tips, either from the actual conference or that you've heard yourselves. So Andrew, do you want to kick off? Quick top tip on climate and water.
Yeah, I think the important one for me is to think about the whole of the life of the asset. We're building infrastructure for the next 50 and 60 years. Let's think about the whole life cycle, the replacements, the operational emissions. Let's think the whole picture, not just pick on one or two bits.
My top tip would be to have consistency of measurements and across the project, and data sharing between companies like consultants and contractors, standardizing tools and methods for each phase of the project, so design and construction, and making these more readily available and aware for everyone.
My top tip is be curious. I guess I've learned so much talking to people in community, contractors. I've learned so much from contractors just talking about the dewatering pumps that burn heaps of fuel and the dewatering pumps that are super efficient. Talking to my leaders and my team about how can we do this better. And reading lots of articles, looking at new guidance that's out there. Just be curious, keep your eyes open.
Yeah, I agree. Having a more open conversation around embodied carbon and operating emissions, but also being willing to learn new design or construction methods. I agree with Kate around knowledge sharing between our companies will be important for better outcomes for everyone in the future. But I also just wanted to add that it was so inspiring attending the water conference, the amount of knowledge and positive change that people wanted to have all in that room and at that conference was so inspiring. Everyone was there wanting to make a difference for the future and wanting the best outcomes. It was a really positive and welcoming sector to be in, to be honest.
That's great. Thanks, Alice. And I guess my top tip would be do something, do it now, and it doesn't have to be perfect. We've just got to make a start. Thank you, Kate, Alida, and Alice for joining Andrew and myself today. It was great to talk to you all about the Water New Zealand conference and everything that we saw there about climate change. Thanks to everyone for taking the time to listen in to this podcast. Remember, this is a series, so look out for the next one where Hannah and I will be talking to Lisa and Simon from Yarra Valley Water about their journey towards zero carbon.